Swing it, boys, swing for the fence. Shove it, boys, make 'em miss. Some big league chew and a baseball souvenir. Come on, sing with me now. The Joe is home, sweet home. It's roll, tide, roll. The Joe is home, that's right. Home, sweet home. Hey, look, is that Roll Tide Willie over there? Blitz, Bama, Blitz.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this special episode of the Weekly Joe Extra. I'm Paul Graham. We have Roger Myers here with us from the Tuscaloosa Bureau. Coming to us tonight, our special guest, Kent Matthes, well known to you folks with Alabama baseball ties. Alabama great from 2006 to 09 with some very good clubs there. He's got a lot of connection to our program and can tell you a lot about those years and what has followed since. But with it being the eve of the draft, or at least a couple of weeks leading into it, we thought it'd be a good time to pull Ken in. He's a registered MLB agent, and runs an agency. And we will talk about all things draft tonight after we get into Kent's career at Alabama and then kind of what's going on in the afterlife. I have got a list of probably 50 questions, and hopefully we can get to 20 of them that we'll talk about. We'll let this kind of be a primer, kind of a draft 101, because people probably catch the spectacle of the NFL draft, and it's such a big TV production. It goes for 3 solid nights, and then there's so much poured into it. The baseball draft's a little more obscure, but a whole lot more, guys involved in it. A whole lot more goes into it because of the kind of the interplay with the college programs, the JUCO programs, the high school guys coming out. So there's a lot more. I think it's a little more of a thinking man's game. So Ken, I think you're in the more of the thinking man's business than your football brethren. But we'll get into that a little bit and talk about that as the night goes on. First of all, Kent, welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Appreciate you guys having me. It's Roger was a huge part of all of our time at Alabama, and just been a huge fan of Alabama baseball, and really enjoyed my time there. So I was excited to jump on with you all.
Yep, great. Well, we're happy to have you here. Just in general, some memories of Alabama baseball and your time there and during the era in which you were there. Some very competitive teams and some very memorable games and memorable teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to just go into college wherever you're at and win the conference year one, And so my freshman year, I remember us celebrating, at Tennessee after we beat them and found out that we were co-SEC champions, I believe, in Kentucky that year. And so I think that year was such an interesting year, and it was a great, I think, learning year, and it was really, metaphor for a lot of things, just sports related, business related, because, I wouldn't say that we had like an incredibly talented team at the beginning of that year. I remember, I think early in the season, we lost 2 out of 3 to Winthrop, and then, we just got into SEC play, and I think a lot of the older veteran players really took over from a leadership standpoint. I remember, Matt Downs did a great job. Evan Bush, Cody Valverde had a big year. You've got, Emil and Pamel and those guys. And so it was a great, I think just senior and junior, upper class leadership group that really took over. And then you had some young, talented guys, like Avila and, those guys that I think, ended up having incredible careers. And then from a star power standpoint, you had Wade LeBlanc, you had David Robertson. So I think that you had a little bit of everything, right? You had, I'm pretty sure I was like on the golf course with a couple of those older guys, like when Downs got drafted. And so, he wasn't expecting to get drafted, ended up getting drafted super late. And then
36th round.
36th round. Wow.
Yeah, 36th round, which they don't even have anymore, And then he ends up, winning a World Series. So, I think it was an incredible team to be part of and just, start that college career and I think personally, 2009 was such a special year for me, and
Mhm.
it was such a fun year. I think to be able to share with the fans and my teammates and just family and just it was incredible. But I think from a season standpoint, I mean, being one game away from Omaha,
Yeah.
and
Right.
it's hard to get any better than that.
Right.
That was a tough series. Well,
Yeah.
as fans back then, you did not have a ton of playing time that freshman year,
Mhm.
2006 year, and a lot of us felt like if you had been in right field, we might have had a better chance.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, and I think it's right now the college game is so tough. It's really tough to come in and play as a freshman. And so if players,
Especially.
ever ask me any advice, I just say, hey, I wasn't playing much, early, and had a couple issues like just some medical stuff that we were dealing with just to make sure that I was healthy. And then, when I got healthy, the guys in the outfield were hitting really well, and I
Mhm.
just didn't really get much of an opportunity. But then,
Timing.
but then when it counted at the end, I was in there. SEC tournament, regional, super regional, and so I think, and then after that, I never left the lineup, and so I think that taking that momentum, had a good summer in summer ball that year, and then I think it just really propelled me to a good
Mhm.
next 3 years of my career there. But
Right.
I think that for me, it's not really about how it starts, it's how it's finished. And so I think that just being able to continue to work hard and just try and, be positive throughout that year. And then, I was in there when it mattered at the end. But, I'm with you, Roger. I wish I would have played more that first year.
That
It
that
was a
home
talented team. So
that
Uh,
was it pinch home run against Florida in the SEC tournament.
it was against LSU, but yeah,
LSU. I
yeah,
mean,
right.
yeah,
that was smoked.
yeah.
Mhm.
But the longest home run I remember seeing was at Ole Miss. You hit it
Uh,
over those tennis courts in left field.
Well, it's funny. Anytime I come across somebody from Ole Miss, they bring that up,
they
and
remember that one? Yeah.
it's a coach, a player, a fan. Like they just talk about that ball, and I think every story gets embellished a little bit, but they talk about it going out of the stadium and hitting
Mhm.
a cop car in the parking lot. And
Mhm.
so it was I think going back to Oxford and seeing where that was,
Right.
that was a good shot for sure.
Right. Kent
For
could
those of y'all that don't know, in 2009, Kent led the nation in home runs with
uh,
28 and was
and it,
SEC Player of the Year.
yeah, and as good a hitter as Kent was, I mean, kick and rake. Let's talk about this guy picking it in the field. I mean, we were, you know, treated Andrew Pinckney in right field the last several
Yeah.
years, and the not on pink moniker that we coined. Um, this guy pegged a lot of guys from the outfield. Talk
Yes,
about.
he did.
Well, I think that's one reason I loved, watching the Bryce Fowler play right field this year. I mean, he
Yes.
had an incredible just defensive year that I think unfortunately like it just doesn't get quantified very well in the
No.
college game. I think in professional baseball, there's a lot of metrics to be able to help just show what the value is to the team and to the player. But in college, I mean, I used to absolutely love playing defense. I used to love, and it's funny, Paul, because I got to Alabama as a third baseman. And just
Mhm.
like any
Yeah.
recruiting story, it's like you're going to be
Yeah.
the guy, you're going to be the third baseman, and I show up there. It's me, it's Avila, it's Kyle Moore, it's Matt Downs, it's Evan Bush.
uh,
And so Downs ended up playing third. Avila, was DH and caught a little bit. I went to right field. Evan Bush went to second. And so, I think that we all kind of, went around the diamond a little bit. But once I got comfortable out there in right field, I ended up absolutely loving it. And I think just throwing hitters out and robbing home runs, I think like, making the web gems, I loved that. And
mhm.
so
Yeah.
I remember there was a we played Auburn my senior year, and I robbed a home run of a big hitter for Auburn, Joseph Sanders, like
Mhm.
Oh
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
26 home runs that year as well. So I robbed a home run of his, and then the next game, there was a big play like down the right field line, and the guy at first took a big turn, and I backpicked him at first base to end the game. And so that was a lot of fun for me, just because the defensive side. Actually, that might have been 2008, but that was one of those years. But we ended up, I think it was fantastic, like just to be able to have that opportunity to go out there, and I think just they let me be aggressive with my arm, throw to bases, and even sail through the cutoff man sometimes, because I earned that opportunity just because I was accurate and I had a good arm. But I
Right.
loved that. I mean, I thought it was a lot of fun to be able to play, next to Emil for a couple years, and then play next to Kubal my senior year, who was a great center fielder. And I really enjoyed playing defense, and I think that defense in today's game has never been more valuable. And I think guys that can play on both sides of the ball, it just opens up a lot of opportunities for them.
Bryce
Yeah,
was fantastic, and them giving you the green light to throw paid off, because you, to this day, have the #1 outfield assist record for
Pink didn't catch him on
Alabama.
that.
He has Ken has 23. So,
Nice.
Yeah, we did talk. I mean, we talked at length during the year about how the ground that Richie and center and Bryce and Wright could cover. From the foul line, the wall down the first base line and the right field line, all the way to left center, and what a difference that made for this club. This was a 240 hitting club in the SEC that
Yeah.
managed to win 16 games, and the defensive job those two guys really played a key part in that, I thought.
Yeah, Bonamalo was unbelievable in center. I think probably 5+% of the teams in college baseball, Bryce Fowler's playing center field.
Yeah.
So,
oh yeah,
on this one, I think just having Bonamalo and Bryce next to each other, I mean, that's fun to watch all year for sure.
Sure.
it was for us. It was like the 2023 was Seidel in left, Caden Rose in center, and Pinkston
Center.
right. And then it goes back to what you were talking about with the year you played right. Kubal's in center, and Dugas freshman year he played left.
Yep.
Until Kubal left, then he played center the next 3. So the
Yeah.
3 of you together out there, I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, Dugas ended up
Right.
winning Gold Glove, being the first Alabama player to ever win a Gold
Yeah.
Glove in center field.
Well, I think that's how you kind of craft rosters differently. I think that that 2009 team, we were incredibly offensive. I think you had Brandon May and Jake Smith and some really big hitters in that lineup. You had Rutledge, you had Dugas. We played really good defense, which I think kind of allowed us to have a good season. But because we were pretty light on the mound, we didn't have a great staff that year, which was pretty uncharacteristic for a Jim Wells team. But we hit the ball really well. We played good defense, and I think we got a little beat up down the stretch. I think when Jake Smith broke his ankle at the SEC tournament, I think that kind of was a tough one. But going into the last weekend of the year, we had a chance to win the SEC, and we ended up sputtering a little bit. I think there was about 4 or 5 teams in the mix going into that last weekend, and we ended up sputtering a little bit. Then we went 2 and out at the SEC tournament, and then we went 2 and out at the regional. So it wasn't a great into us, but I think that we had some pieces to make a run that year. I think we just kind of lost a little steam at the end.
What an incredible offensive team, though, guys.
Yeah.
Was that Clay Jones year?
Clay Jones, yeah.
Clay Jones. I mean, he had like 16 home runs.
Yep. Yeah.
Brandon,
Ross. Yeah, Ross.
Ross.
Yes, we had some. I mean, yeah, I think like you said, Kubal, Dugas. I mean, it was a good team for sure.
So, how many guys do you think did you play with that did time in the majors eventually?
It was Rutledge. It was
Wade.
Robertson, Wade, Avila, Downs,
Tommy,
Jimmy Nelson,
Tommy Hunter,
Adam Morgan.
Hey.
Yeah. So we had a. I mean, there was quite a few. So
yeah, a lot of time. I got eight there that I think we.
Tommy, Wade, Alex, Matt, and D-Rob on the 2016.
Yep.
And then you add in. I mean, Dugas was up for a day.
Right.
Dugas was up for a day. Yep, we got. I mean, I think you look at those guys on that team. I mean, it's just. I think it just shows like how strong the SEC is. You know, we won the SEC 1 year. We got to a super regional 1 year and one time in 4 years. And you got, you know, 9 big leaguers, right? You got, over $500 million worth of contracts. You know, it's pretty dang good. So
Yeah, yeah. Hey, one last question just on that. You mentioned like showing up as a third baseman. Talk about that, how that works with these, it- every team brings in 8 guys that played shortstop or what, everybody played a
yeah,
little shortstop. They all pitch, they played short. How does that, how does that, as a player, how tough an adjustment is that? As all of a sudden you show up and you're like, oh my God, if I'm going to get on the field, I got to learn to, shag fly balls, or, I'm used to being a pitcher. Now I got to go, I kind of, I think I could be throwing out there, but I gotta craft my skill at second base or wherever it
yeah.
is.
I think that I can speak about when I was coming into school, and I think that the mentality has shifted a little bit more with players these days, and I think just with the travel ball and just
Sure.
the showcase style, and I think people jump into different teams all the time, and I think that there's a lot of players that just want that guarantee. Hey, I'm going to be the guy, and it's a little harder for them to maybe transition to other positions, but I mean I can talk through just when we were there. I think there was a lot of unselfishness in those locker rooms where players just wanted to be on the field, however they could help the
Yeah.
team. And, there were some guys there, like you look at a guy like Austin Hyatt, who true redshirt 1 year, ended up being our best arm, getting drafted. That's a guy that like in today's landscape, like he's in the
Oh,
portal and he's in the
Mhm.
rotation somewhere.
Where
And,
else? Yeah.
he's a true redshirt for us, right? And then you look at his senior year and just has an unbelievable year. So I think there was a lot of guys that ended up just really, I think, just adjusting to what their expectations were when they got there, and just trying to do what was in the betterment for the team.
Yeah. Yeah. And beyond Alabama, I mean, you get picked in the fourth round of the Rockies organization. You'd spend parts of what about, I think, 7 years in the minors. Talk about that transition and just memories of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was so drafted in 2009. It was I think just it was fantastic to start that pro career and just get in there, and it's a pretty different. And I talked to a lot of SEC players that
Yeah.
play in good environments, and we leave from a regional Clemson, and then a couple weeks later I'm in the middle of nowhere, Washington State. I had never been west of
Mhm.
Nebraska, which is where we played our freshman year.
Right.
And I'm in Washington State. We're playing in front of 150 people. And, you're literally playing every single day. And I
Yeah.
made some incredible friendships and relationships, in those days. And I learned a lot about, myself, and I learned a lot about baseball. It's helped me insurmountably with what I do now, and just being able to help players. But
Mhm.
it's I think just it's a different landscape. It's a different type of game.
Yeah.
You really have to stay healthy. You have to maximize that short window. I chose to stay for my senior year at Alabama, which was an incredible decision. But you get out there and I'm 22 in short season, and there's a lot of 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds that I'm playing with, playing against. I think those guys that end up signing out of international that are 16 years old or out of high
Yeah.
school, they just have a lot longer leashes to be able to, have injuries or, kind of go
Sure.
through slumps and stuff like that. So, the thing for me that I really learned is just how important health is. I had I had knee surgery, tore my patella in 2010, had hand surgery 2011, tore my oblique 2012, and then I had my back injury in 2013,
Mhm.
which really, ended my career. And so I still kept playing, but I couldn't lift the same.
Yeah. The same.
I
Yeah.
couldn't practice the same way. I lost a
Mhm.
lot of weight. And so I think there was a lot of things that went into it. And so that's one thing that I really help players with now, is just
Mhm.
make sure they understand that the number one way to increase your value is to stay on the field. And so if
Mhm.
you can stay on the field, if you can recover better, if your body well of what your workout should be, your nutrition, your supplements, your hydration, like all that type of stuff. And I think it's players now are a lot more cognizant of that, you know. It's a lot different than the game was in the 90s where, you know, guys were going out every night and I think just showing up at the ballpark. And now there's a I think there's an affinity for taking care of your body and
Health.
trying to eat right and trying to make sure that you can post as much as possible. So and you kind of have to because everybody's throwing harder, running faster, bigger, stronger now, and so I think that's a way that guys can really have a pretty good competitive advantage.
Yeah.
That eating right is hard to do in the minor leagues when
Oh,
you're
minors. That's what I was going to
when,
say.
when you're getting $20 a day meal money on the road
Right.
and getting
Yeah.
paid nothing for a
Yeah,
lot
So when I had my back injury, you know, I was trying to do a lot of research, you know, how could I decrease inflammation? So one of it talked about, you know, diet and, you know, talked about, you know, gluten and dairy and, you know, that type of stuff. And so, you know, Roger, to that, I ended up like traveling with a cooler when we would go on the road and, you know, because, you know, we'd get to the minor league spots and it's just like how, you know, most people think about it. You've got the, you know, peanut butter and jelly and the hot dogs and the, you know,
Yeah.
Cheetos, and you know that's about it. And so I think that was one thing that I wish I would have learned earlier in my career, but you know, it was something that I think I really try and help players with now.
Yeah, I was going to say
you were sorry, you were doing the Brock Bennett when he was in college, when he would go to a cookout or go to a party. He took his own food and a gallon of water.
He was ahead of it. That's probably
way
why.
ahead of it. Sorry, Mark.
No, that's all right. I was going to say, just I mean, this was one I had to probably ask you a little bit later, but it was a good time to ask it now. Some of the advantage of playing in college. I mean, you're advising high school kids. I mean, I mean, I'm sure in a lot of instances, and these guys that may be marginal teen what am I trying to say, like the 15th, 18th, 17th round, that type of thing, as opposed to, hey, I got these offers, I can play at a place like in Alabama or Georgia or wherever I go, and I've got I got training table, I got all these resources around me. Is that something that sometimes you steer these guys in your some of your discussions with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think we feel like 95+% of players should go to college. Like, I think just growing up, getting more independent. I think, you know, learning, you know, how to play in front of crowds and just, I think being coached and just, you know, getting that experience of hopefully playing in you know, the postseason and really getting an education as well. And so I think, you know, we've done some big deals for some high school kids. I think, you know, the lowest deal we've done for a high school kid is 850,000. So, you know, we typically don't, you know, kind of stay away from those guys that are picked later that just want to sign for whatever. But I think that from our standpoint, we really just are upfront with what we feel like the advantages of, you know, are of going to college. And, you know, you're getting the incredible resources of, you know, just I think the weight room and just you know, the training tables and all that type of stuff that you really take for granted when you get into the minor leagues. And so I think that there are some high school players where the draft kind of chooses them and they're going to give them, you know, good 7-figure bonus. But outside of that, we feel like most players should go to college. And
No, that's good.
that's why we've developed really good relationships with, you know, schools, is because they know that's our ideology and that's, you know, how we genuinely feel. And that's what we, you know, reiterate to players.
You had Carter Johnson last year, didn't you?
Yeah, so Carter's a client. It's a fantastic young man, great family. Carter was committed to Alabama. He was, you know, very excited to potentially play for Alabama. But you know, he was one of those guys where the draft chose him, and so he had, you know, he had probably half a dozen teams that wanted to pay him in the, you know, low $2 million, and so we ended up getting 2.8 million from the Marlins in the second round, and so he's done a great job, and he's you know, he's got a very bright future ahead of him.
Absolutely. Yeah, we refer to guys like that now. Carter is Alabama rising sophomore Carter Johnson, like we do Alabama rising junior Bryce Eldridge.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, it's kind of no brainer. Okay, so a message to our high school signees. I think we got 14 signed, Roger. So what do you say? 95% should go play. That would mean only a partial one of them should go to the draft. So I think they should all show, right? Is that? Some of those guys may be your client. I don't want to but yeah, we're just making subliminal messages here. So we're talking about it already, but tell me a little bit about your profession now, how you got in, what you're doing, how you got into it, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, so I when I finished playing, I was planning on getting into finance and just that was what I studied at Alabama and just ended up going through the process with some big companies and just realized that wasn't what I was most passionate about at the
Mhm.
time. And I think it's really hard for athletes post career to make that transition. I think you've played a sport your whole life and you anticipated that being the only job that you would have, and then
Mhm.
kind of, and I'm fortunate that, I came from an academic minded family. My dad was a professor, and
Oh, really? Okay.
I'm really, fortunate that I stayed and got my degree at Alabama, and that was something that was important to me. And so, but, I decided not to go the finance route, and then I got a call. I was represented by a huge, international agency, and they said, "Hey, we'd like to talk to you. We think you'd be fantastic to potentially come on and be an agent. And have you thought about that before?" And I said, "No, I've never thought about being an agent." So
Mhm.
I ended up going down that path, and so they talked me into coming on board, and I was honestly pretty excited because I think when you look at finance versus what I do now, I'd much rather
Mhm.
talk 90% baseball and 10% money than the other way around. So
Yeah.
I made the right decision, and it was great to get that experience at the big agency. And so I, was at CAA, and then I went to WME IMG as one of the co-heads there, and then I went from there to Stadium Ventures, which is
Stadium.
yeah. So I ended up starting Stadium Ventures a little over 3 years ago. So now
Mhm.
I've been in the business for over 7 years,
Mhm.
and got incredible experiences at those two worldwide companies, and I think that that's really helped me learn about I think different ways that companies operate. And I think that for me, I saw a lot of things that have helped me. I think that I saw a lot of things that have maybe made me rethink about ways that we can differentiate ourselves. And so I think
Sure.
our company is very different. I think from an operation standpoint, where we're more boutique, we want to stay boutique. We've got smaller draft classes. We really focus on quality over
Mhm.
quantity. We don't throw a huge cast net out. We don't have 20 draft advisors out covering all over the country. I think we've got, 4 full-time employees, 6 part-time employees, and it's, we I think we had 4 guys in the draft last year and did almost 8 million in contracts. And so we try and just, have a handful of guys that we think are going to be really, good players, but they're also good people, come from good families. And
Right.
so, I'm excited that, Stadium Ventures has grown the way it has, and hopefully we can keep doing good work for players.
Yeah.
Do you guys handle anything other than baseball?
Just
Yeah.
baseball. Yep.
Just baseball. Okay.
We've had opportunities to get into other sports, but we want to stick with just baseball right now. And we love what we do, and we feel like we've got a great niche in the market. So
Mhm.
we're just going to continue to double down on that.
That's
Right.
perfect.
May come as a surprise to people. I mean, well, like I said, you got a business background. It's not a legal background so much. Is it kind of if I polled all the agents out there doing, all the registered baseball agents, are most going to be finance, most going to be legal, a mix, or what's the,
Yeah, I think if you talk to the agents that are attorneys, they're going to tell you that you got to be an attorney. You got to be an attorney.
yeah,
But
yeah.
at the end of the day, like, our contracts are so specialized. I think that it's something that we literally deal with, every single year, and
Right.
we work with the union, and we work with our general counsel, who's fantastic,
Mhm.
just to make sure that we have all the T's crossed and the I's dotted, and make sure that we're able to capitalize on everything that we can for the players. Make sure that we are able to put them in a great position to understand their rights and to understand their value. I think there's a lot of there's a ton of agents out there that I would say a very large minority of them are attorneys. Like, it's a
Mhm.
small number, but I would say that there's a good, maybe a small number that played like I did, at a high
Sure.
level, and then there's a lot of people that just kind of, wanted to get in the business, and it was something that was appealing to them. And so I think there's people with all different kinds of backgrounds, but typically, every firm is going to have, an attorney that is, tied into them somehow just to be able to help out. But
Sure.
most of the top agents that I know are not attorneys.
Okay.
Do-
We had a question. I'm sorry, one of our
Oh, I
listeners.
just want to ask one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you help guys with outside baseball thing, like their
Oh, yeah.
endorsements and that kind of thing?
Yeah, we'll do I think just in the nature of NIL, like we've done a lot of NIL deals for our guys, and just been, I think, pretty successful with delivering from a brand standpoint. I think that once players turn pro, we do the trading card deals, we do the apparel deals. We've got great relationships with a lot of the, on field, the bats, the gloves, the batting gloves, all that type of stuff. And so we've been able to structure some pretty unique deals for our guys, especially as they continue to move up. And I think that, we've got some great opportunities for some of our college players from an NIL standpoint as well. So yeah,
Perfect.
we're a one-stop shop, and we really enjoy kind of, being able to provide some of those deals for our guys.
Excellent.
Yeah. Hey, talk about how it's changed over the years, because, in the Roger, like in the 90s, you go from Antonio Langham, at a bar in New Orleans signing a cocktail napkin and getting Alabama football on probation, into eternity. And agents were just, it's like, keep the agents away. I got to keep all the agents away. And now it seems like there's a better, maybe, you're probably, hanging out in the locker room and handing out the business card, but with the way the business has changed, or the business of college baseball has changed, talk about that transition and how different it is now.
Yeah, it's completely different. I mean, I wish that the NCAA would have been a little bit more proactive with it. I think that, I know Coach Saban's been very vocal about just I think the chaos that has, transpired over the last few years. And I think
Mhm.
um, it's really hard to regulate, things that go on behind the scenes with the transfer portal, and from a compensation standpoint. And so I think that once they opened the floodgates, I think it was really hard to control. And I think that it's the new system. I've heard mixed reviews on. I think it depends on how the NIL Go app,
Mhm.
how the launch is, and just how schools are able to work within that. I think that the rev share component, I think, is fantastic for football. I think that the some of the other sports, especially the women's
Yeah.
sports, it's not very favorable towards.
No.
And so I think that the NCAA should definitely reevaluate that in the coming years. But I think it's never going to be a perfect system for anybody, right?
Right.
It's not going to
And
be a perfect system for the players, for the coaches, for the schools. I mean, these schools having to pay out a multi-billion dollar, settlement, and, being able to have, 20.5 million for the rev share. I mean, these are big numbers that
yeah.
they're responsible for now. And so I think we'll see what happens over the next couple of years, but I do think there's going to be some more changes that are coming.
And you certainly are going to see a lot of legal, lawsuits, and I mean, in my mind, goes to Title IX and how
Yeah.
the share is going to work. And in reality, somebody's probably already filed that lawsuit on that. I mean, it just seems like it's still a little shaky. It's a good thing. I mean, initially, but we're baseball guys. It's like, it doesn't feel like it's going to trickle down that much to baseball as much as, aside from obviously the scholarship opportunities and all that'll be much better.
You were talking about Langham signing the napkin after the Sugar Bowl. Kent's dad Dieter played for Miami football for
Yeah. Okay.
Miami back before that, I guess. But
my dad told me stories that at Miami where they would go do yard work for an hour and get $500, which was a ton of money at the time. And so I remember when I was at Alabama, and we would have these compliance meetings that everybody was just dreading sitting through. And I worked a camp in the summer and had to basically had to submit what I was getting paid to
Yeah.
compliance to make sure that I wasn't getting paid too much per hour. I'm not sure how they came up with that calculation, but I was getting like $40 an hour, and so, but we still had to go through that process.
It's yeah,
You're
yeah.
talking about like a just a complete 180 degree now of college baseball players, like good players getting six figures like very, very regularly. So it's crazy.
Yeah, we're
Kent
seeing it.
had wonderful parents. They were some
It's
of the
great.
some of the best player parents we've ever had come through here. Connie and Dieter, they were just, everybody loved them. Still, I mean, they're great people.
They love Tuscaloosa. They had a great time there as well. So
yeah. Hey, listener question from at Rob Von Sharpie, who was actually appeared on one of our right field ranger extra back in the season. He asked, would love to know the best way you think someone should go about entering the industry, as well as what a college kid can do to stand out, give themselves a leg up in getting into the industry, I presume.
it's a good question. We get a lot of emails and messages about that, and I think that I really, the best analogy for me is you look at baseball, right? You look at players and you look at scouts, how they view players, right? They view them based on five tools. Can they run? Can they play defense? How's their arm? Can they hit? Can they hit for power, right? So you got five tools. So I think when you look at an agent, you really need to look at like what the specialty of that agent is, right? To be able to get into the business, nowadays you either need to be incredibly well versed in data and analytics. You need to be an attorney. You need to have played and just be able to, help players and just being able to talk through, the experiences and the obstacles that you've gone through. You need to be very well versed in the marketing side, the branding, the NIL, or, kind of a fifth one would really just be somebody who's a little bit of a Swiss Army knife and can kind of do a little bit of everything, and maybe some baseball operations, some client service, and maybe some, social media and the graphic stuff now. But I think you really have to find, your niche, right? If you go in and you try to say, hey, I'm going to go to law school, but I'm also going to, just be able to code and learn Python, and I'm also going to really understand NIL, and also I want to try and play in college. I think it's really hard to do that, right?
Yeah.
So you have to figure out like what your path is. Where's going to be your path to the industry, and you've got to be a good self-evaluator, which I think is a good process to go in any industry, is just really evaluate what your strengths and what your weaknesses are. And so, if you're very academic minded, you probably want to go the attorney route, or you want to be able to go through school and kind of come out and be able to go through arbitration and help players that way. But for me, having played, I think that just unlocked a lot of opportunities to be able to relate to players and just help them through what they're going to go through, at each stage of their careers.
Yeah.
And like everywhere, and like everything else, connections.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Networking connections.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I mean, it's 100%. I think that, at WME, I got a call from a guy who he was very close with one of the super high ups of an NFL team, like a minority owner. And he said, do you mind, like, could you, get his son an internship? And so we were able to do that, and he ended up being very good. But I think that's like, to be able to make those types of calls and have those types of connections, I think is really beneficial. And there's a book called Who Not How, and I think that's very true in our business. But still, once you get in the business, just like a player on the field, like, you're going to get exposed if you can't really play at a high level. You've got to be able to recruit clients, you got to be able to sign clients, and you got to be able to keep clients. And so, that's really the only way to be successful in this business.
The draft coming up. Okay, so here we are, 2025. Talk about, I mean, give a draft 101 on, the era from the COVID pandemic up to now, and kind of what has changed and how that's changed what you guys do.
Yeah, it was 40 rounds, and then it goes from 40 rounds to 5 rounds, and then it jumps up from 5 to 20. I don't think we'll ever go past 20 again. I think if anything, it might even condense a little bit more. But I think for the foreseeable future, we'll stay at 20. It's I think you look at just the bonus pools, you look at the slot values. players are definitely getting paid more now, which is great. It's great for the
Mhm.
game. I think it's still, I think contrary to their value, once they get drafted, it's still a small number with which I think, a lot of fans and stuff don't really understand. I mean, you look
Mhm.
at Paul Skeens, who goes number one overall, signs for, $9+ million. Once he starts playing in low A, high A, like his trade values, $40+ million. And so I
Mhm.
think that a lot of people don't realize, they see these big numbers and these big contracts, but the value of these players once you get into professional baseball are significantly higher, as they start playing well. And so I think that the draft model right now, it's again, it's not perfect, but I think that
Mhm.
it's definitely better than it was.
Okay. Okay.
Pre-COVID, I think that the COVID year was really bad for high school players that wanted to get drafted, but it was
Mhm.
incredibly beneficial for college baseball. I mean, that 2020 class, um, it was, I'm pretty sure was it Dylan Cruz, like that was a big class of guys like, Caden Wallace ended up going to Arkansas. There were a lot of guys that ended up going to college that, probably would have signed in a normal draft. And so you
Mhm.
have incredibly talented rosters at these big schools of guys that probably should not have made it to campus. Um,
Sure.
I do think that, giving the extra year of eligibility, I think it's pretty tough to, you see guys that are 23 years old still playing baseball. I don't know if that was the right thing to do just unilaterally, at the time. I think that it would have been hard to take it as a case by case basis, but it is what it is. And I think that all those guys that had that extra COVID year, they're all out now. So I think
Mhm.
we're getting
Finally.
more back to a true system.
Right. Yeah.
So in shortening the draft, do you think there will be more cuts to minor league
I was
teams?
gonna say, yeah, it's
Because I know they did away with a lot of, like even what a couple
Mhm.
of, did they do away with rookie ball or what,
Rookie.
one of
Yeah,
the,
so they got rid of two levels. So I think
right.
Mhm.
that's why, the draft, I don't think will ever increase to more than 20 rounds, is
Mhm.
because these teams are really
Number to
handcuffed
go.
from a number of players that they can keep, on their minor league rosters. Whether they're injured, whether they're active, they're really handcuffed, and so they can't just, have 300+ players that are sitting there. They've got to be able to be very calculated about positions that they bring on, and guys that are not only able to be big prospects for them and help them at the big league level, but a lot of
Mhm.
minor leagues is just filling rosters so that the prospects have players to
Somebody to play against.
compete
Yeah.
against.
Okay.
You got
Yeah.
to be
Never
able to
thought of that
field
one.
the team. So, and some players that you got the Matt Downs example. He was drafted to be a filler and ends up getting to the big leagues and winning World Series. So,
Mhm.
you hear things like that all the time. Mike Piazza and
Yeah,
these.
30 something. Yeah, 30 something.
67th round.
Oh,
Yeah,
60's even further. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine having that many rounds?
yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Right. So talk now a little bit about the impact. Well, no, let me ask you this. How soon, how soon are parents or players, and I'm talking about like the high school kid probably, how soon are they reaching out to you? When guys are ninth grade, 10th grade, I mean, how soon are you getting contacts from these folks?
So our model's a little bit different. I think
Yeah.
when I first started at CAA, one of the first calls that I made was Blaze Jordan, and
Okay.
Blaze Jordan was a YouTube sensation. He was from Mississippi and hitting balls 500 feet with a metal bat.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I called him, and at that time I believe he was a sophomore. And so he was he and his father were very nice on the phone, and they said, hey, we've had somebody for 2 years, and so. That was kind of my welcome to the industry. I was like, this guy had an advisor in eighth grade.
In eighth
So,
grade.
I think that's a little extreme, but
uh,
we typically, I think the earliest we'll normally reach out to a player is sophomore in high school. I
yeah.
think, if you don't do that, you're probably going to be late.
Mhm.
Our model's a little bit different. We're not looking at the guys that have a full beard at 16 and throw 95.
Mhm.
Like, we're
Yeah.
looking at the guys that just using my, I think, evaluation skill set and just having played and seeing how guys move and just their work ethic and their off the field preparation and their genetics and did the parents play sports, like all that type of stuff we look into. And I think we'll reach out to guys sophomore year. I think sometimes junior year if it's a pop-up guy that kind of gets on the scene a little bit later, but that's kind of around the time that we'll reach out to a high school player.
Uh-huh. So are you guys or guys that work with your firm, are they at Lake Point in Atlanta or at the the showcase events or at the big the big perfect game tournaments? I mean, is that kind of where they're making those contacts?
Yeah, I mean, our one of our guys that runs the high school side for us in the draft. He's actually in Cary, North Carolina right now.
Yeah.
He
Mm.
was, texting me yesterday saying the real floor was like 118 degrees. He looked like a lobster, but he loves it. I mean, there's people that absolutely love watching baseball, and he's out there watching 3 or 4 games a day and
Sure.
bouncing back in between fields, and so
Mm.
he loves it. And I think that that's really how I got started into the business, is you have to learn that side. And I
Mm.
remember going to a big event, Perfect Game Junior National, when I started, and left there, had a massive notebook of notes on each guy, and it was fun to kind of look back on that and see who guys that I was right about, guys that I missed on. And so I think that's really how you have to get started into the business. And so I think that we have guys that cover a lot of the top events, and they do a great job. I'll pop in, like I'll go to the Cape Cod League for a couple days. I'll go to Team USA Collegiate for a couple days, and then I'll probably go to the top 2 high school events for a couple days, and that's about it. But we've got a great team that really covers a lot of the other tournaments, and we're fortunate to work with a lot of good players that are at those events as well.
So you have to throw scout into your bag of tricks as well.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, do you do any training for your guys for that, or is it just like an instinctive thing?
So I think that the guy that I hired to run our high school side, we developed a relationship over about 6 months, and I'd ask him, hey, what do you think about this guy? And I would already have my report and just kind of make sure that we lined up, and just he's a really really good evaluator, and so I think he's been a great addition. One of the guys that I hired was offered to be a scout, and he was trying to decide whether to come on our side or go on the team side. So he came on our side, and then one of the other guys that we have was a scout. He's an older gentleman, but he was a World Series, scout, Hall of Fame. Like he's been fantastic, and so those guys do a really good job evaluating. And I think that for us, I think we've got a little different process than most agencies. I think a lot of agencies, they'll go off the publicly available rankings, or they'll go, if a kid's committed to LSU or Vanderbilt, which I think was, a lot more beneficial to them before they changed the August 1st recruiting rule. So, you'd have guys that were committing as a freshman in high school, and now you can't do that anymore. So I think for us, we've got a really good model of guys with particular skill sets that we like to identify, and then again, bringing in the off-field component as well. Like, are these guys that we want to jump on planes for and service for the next decade, be a part of their families, and all the things that just come with being having that role in a player's career.
Yeah. How about analytics? I mean, so much has changed in the game in analytics. Everybody's got their own. They got their own proprietary models, I'm sure, on different teams. I mean, if you guys got kind of a approach to that, or is there something kind of like you said, there's publicly available stuff? Do you all have your own spin on it?
Yeah, we do. I think that most of the top agencies do, and I think for us, like our pre-draft process, we'll go through a organizational review that's the 200 plus pages that goes through all 30 clubs and goes through a pretty advanced analysis, and then we'll go through an individual player profile that goes over a lot of the advanced analytics and just how we were able to approximate their value. We really try and manage expectations going into the draft, and really try and help these guys understand what their value is, and then it also helps us advocate for them with the clubs. And so we use past comps, and we're able to compare them, with their high school data in their travel ball data, plus the college guys. Like it's, there's a lot more data there.
There's so much out there. Yeah.
Yeah, especially if they play in the bigger conferences. But, on the pro side too, there's just so much data that we're able to tap into where, you know, pitcher like, a release point, whether they're, a low release or a high release, or, their induced vertical break on their pitches and
Mhm.
just the movement shapes and, all that type of stuff that we can look into that really helps, identify, I think, just some, low hanging fruit for a player to improve upon, but also, maybe certain characteristics that are unique to them. I think
Mhm.
that, the Tampa Rays do an incredible job of just identifying those really, really unique players that they're able to maximize their potential and just
Uh,
whether it's a tweak or a developmental change. And so I think that from, our standpoint, we don't have the resources nor the budget that most of these clubs do, multi-billion-dollar teams, but I think for us, we try and, stay up to speed as much as we can with all the advanced stuff and just make sure that our players have the information and they're empowered with it. And, you kind of have to in today's day and age.
Yep. Go ahead, Roger. You got one?
No, no,
Okay.
you got
I
more
I-
questions, I'm sure.
I got it. Every time he touches on one that I've already got down, I got to go back to. You said this a minute ago when you're evaluating, you start evaluating people and you're like, okay, here's, did their parents play baseball? Was their mom a volleyball player? That type of thing. So I think specifically now, I mean, the consensus first pick in the draft this year is probably Ethan Holiday, right? I mean, is kind of what most are saying, right? Generally, right up there. As his brother was a few years ago. Does a guy like Ethan Holiday get almost like the Bama bump we used to call it in recruiting under Saban? Saban would go sign a 3-star guy or get a commitment from him. Next thing you know, the ratings are bumping him to 4 or bumping him to 5.
Yeah.
Does Ethan Holiday get a? I didn't see. I don't know a thing about Ethan Holiday except I just see him hit home runs in high school, which doesn't mean a lot. Does somebody like that whose dad played, whose brother is already up 2 years after being drafted? I mean, does somebody like that get a little bit of an artificial bump? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think naturally, I think there's two big sides that I think teams are going to increase their value of that player. One is just going to be the genetics, and I think just naturally having Matt Holiday as your father, or Drew Jones, who went the first round a couple years ago,
Yeah.
Andrew Jones, Jack Leiter, Al Leiter, just you've got a lot of these players that have connections to whether it's their dad or their uncle or somebody that's, been very instrumental to just their, development.
Sure.
Um, I think Quentin Young is a high school kid for this year, who's Delman Young, I believe, is his uncle. So you see it every year, but I think the big part, and Alex Avila, he'll be the first one to tell you that.
Mhm.
I think just growing up in the clubhouse and having Tommy
Yes.
Lasorda as his
Exactly.
godfather, I think that really helped him when he got into professional baseball, because he knew what to expect, and he knew, just I think a lot of the just very, very important details of how to navigate just a pretty complex space he had been in his entire life. And so I think
Sure.
that's where a lot of those players that have, relatives that played professional baseball, they're able to have pretty, I think, a pretty impressive head start. And so I think teams realize that. They realize the comfortability of those players, like once they get into the
Mhm.
professional locker room and just, navigating spring training and all that type of stuff. So
Right.
I think those guys definitely will get a big bump in the boards.
Mhm. Right.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean,
It does. Yeah.
Avila was like a big leaguer when he got here when he was 18.
Mhm.
Correct.
I mean,
Correct.
he just the way he carried himself,
They
everything.
naturally know how to conduct.
Mm.
They know the business. I
Right.
mean, they know how it works, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, here's one for you, and you don't have to name names here, but of the Major League Baseball organizations, and maybe you can do them in groups here. Who's the best to deal with? Who's the worst to deal with? And by that, and maybe I'd patch it this way: the big money teams, or the small, the big market money teams, the small market money team. And
So I think
can you even classify them that way?
Yeah, I think there's teams that you deal with, whether it's on the major league side or the draft side. I think that there's teams that you just want to deal with people that are going to be honest. They're going to they're going to have the best interest of the player. They really want the player. They're going to value that player, and they have a plan to develop him. And I think they're just going to be able to negotiate and operate, with some sort of integrity. And so I think that there's definitely individuals that you enjoy dealing with more so than others. But I think there's just so much movement in the space that you see guys that are general managers or assistant GMs or that are just moving all over the time, and you see all the front office that have come up from the Rays umbrella with that are at with the Guardians and with the Dodgers and with all these different organizations now. And so I think a lot of them will operate pretty similarly to the system that they came up in. So you see, I think when I did a lot with Heim Bloom when he was with Boston, and now he's in St. Louis, and I think Heim came up from the Rays, and so there was a lot of ways that he operated that just came, from how the Rays have operated and the success that they've had, and one thing that he did with Boston is he really stockpiled their farm system, and so what the Rays have done a great job with, and they've drafted really well, they've developed really well, and you look at the Red Sox, and they've got an incredibly valuable farm system now, but I think I've dealt with almost all 30 clubs at both capacities. And so it's a big business. You've got tons of money on the line, and huge valuations of these companies, and you've got fan bases that you want to appeal to, but I think for us, like we try and operate just the best interest of the client, and trying to be honest, and negotiate fairly with our guys, while maximizing their potential, maximizing their value, and we've been fortunate to get some good results.
Right. Talk a little bit about how NIL in college now maybe affects so many of the decisions you guys or your clients, even, or guys that you have contact with, go through in determining, do I want to, I guess what ultimately happens is they kind of have to send a bat signal to the team to say, yeah, if you pick me here, I'll go, or here's my number, that type of thing. I mean, you're kind of in that mode, and then you got to balance it with the NIL availability, or and leverage. Is portal leverage a real thing? Is there, or things like that?
Yeah, I think now when you've got a high school kid that's committed to Vanderbilt, it's committed to LSU, committed to the big schools. I think that whether it's a top SEC school, I think typically that's going to come with a higher price tag, right?
Sure.
I think that when it's now in the transfer portal. I mean, you saw a kid. I don't know if he's even committed now, but Ethan Conrad at Wake Forest, who is a projected first round pick. He's in the transfer portal now, and he's draft eligible. He's probably going to get a couple $1 million. And so I think that a lot of players are doing that from a leverage standpoint, just as a fallback, that they've got a couple $100,000 that they know they could fall back on if they decided that they wanted to go back to school and try and improve their statistics and just get another year of development. And so I think that it really weighs into a lot of players. I think at the bigger schools on gives them a little bit more leverage when they go into the draft. But I think it's a great time to be college baseball. It's a great time for professional baseball. I think that the systems are, neither of them are perfect, but they're way better than they used to be. And so that, I think that it's, to answer your question, there's a lot of thought that goes into it for the high school and the college players.
So how does that guy and some others we know of saying they're going in the transfer portal, how does that leverage their draft in any way? They could stay where they are.
Yeah.
And it's the same situation. If they're a draft eligible sophomore or even junior, but mostly sophomore, you say, I'm going to go in the portal to leverage my draft stock.
I think typically you see it with smaller schools. So if you'll see a guy like, that's maybe a projected 4th round pick out of
Murray State.
Call it, Murray State, right? Like at a small school, and they end up going into the transfer portal because, like, if they don't want to sign for $500,000-$600,000, then they could go to, a big SEC school, get, 200 grand, and it's a good fallback to where at least
Mhm.
the major league teams know that they're not going to be able to lowball them. They're not going to sign
Right.
for the 150 minimum. So I think that's where I think a lot of the smaller school players typically like to create a little bit more leverage. But at the end of the day, college players have naturally a lot less leverage than the high school players.
Right.
But I do think that's just a way for them to just get a little of it back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we know of some guys at bigger schools, and it's like,
Mhm.
they at big schools that pay. So, I mean, I just, it doesn't seem like that's actually a thing for them. But in the situation you're talking about, that makes perfectly good sense. I
Yeah,
mean,
for sure.
if it's Sanford or Murray or somebody
Yeah.
that doesn't
Yeah.
have $50,000 to give them,
Correct.
Sure.
they could go to LSU or Tennessee or Arkansas
Mhm.
and get their couple of 100,000, and if
Mhm.
they're, particularly if they're sophomores, and have
For sure.
another
Mhm.
year.
Right.
Absolutely. I got about 5 more minutes, guys.
Yeah,
If
sure.
you want to
Yeah.
do some rapid fire, or if you have a couple.
Yeah. So here's one I was gonna throw out. One of the last ones that I had out there. Talk about, because we talked about this in the green room before the show. Give me your idea of the better calendar for the draft, for portal openings, that sort of thing. Because we talked about that a little bit early on.
Yeah.
And how-
So I think that ideally the draft would be the day after Omaha ends. I've been a proponent of that, and I don't think that's going to change under Commissioner Manfred. But I think that everybody in the industry, whether it's on the team side or the player side or the agent side,
Mhm.
I mean, you think about it. College player gets bounced in a super regional or a regional. They're going to have to wait about a month before they get
Yeah.
drafted, right? And so you're pretty much shut down. You're not playing games, and then you have to kind of get hot again 2 to 3 weeks, kind of in that little kind of indoctrination period once you get drafted, and then by that time you've only got about a month of the season left, so you missed out on at bats, you've gone shut down, and then you got to ramp back up, and then on the scout side you're trying to really juggle between two draft classes because you've got Cape Cod leagues going on, the USA, a lot of the big prep
Mhm.
events. So you're having to juggle those events and identify those players while also preparing for this year's current draft. So I think that just the way college baseball has grown, you continue to set records in Omaha every year with attendance and viewership and all that type of stuff. And so I think having it the last day, the day after the last day of the World Series. So, if game 3 would be on a Monday, you have the draft
Yeah.
on Tuesday or Wednesday,
Start
and
Tuesday. Mhm.
carry it over and have a lot of the fans that are there, and just have I think just it would be an incredible environment that I think Omaha is just a great baseball destination there. I think they would do a great job hosting the draft. But I think it would be it's just too long for players to have to wait, and to be able to have that draft in the middle of the summer. I think it's just really tough for people all the way around.
Right.
Wasn't part of the change, Kent, when they did the draft, used to be during the World Series, a guy would be out there pitching in the third inning, and it's like comes over the loudspeaker, pitcher Joe Smith was just drafted
Just
number
drafted,
2
yeah.
overall.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's like,
So
well, do I
that's
just shut
yeah.
down and
So
walk
I
off the
think that
field?
yeah, it was too early then. It's too late now. Like I
Uh-huh.
think you gotta find kind of that happy medium. And I think just scheduling it for one of those days right after the World Series would be fantastic.
That
Yeah.
sounds like the best idea I've heard.
But I think the transfer portal, like, the issue with that is like, you're there, the transfer portal opens, excuse me, June 2nd. So, you've got, 2 3 weeks left of baseball. So you've got teams that are trying to keep their players while they're still playing, and
Right.
they don't want to lose out on the top guys that are already in the portal, but they're also trying to win a super regional and get to Omaha and win a college World Series. Like I don't know how college coaches do it.
I don't either.
We're trying to balance all that. I mean, I'm getting calls from coaches, hour and a half before a college World Series game, and 20 minutes after it ends, like checking in on players, and it's just like they should be able to enjoy that moment. They should
Yeah.
be able to
Yeah.
be present with their team, and just you're so they're having to be so focused on the next year's team rather than just
Right.
enjoying the work that
Yep.
got them to that point. But the other part is, the draft being so late, teams don't know who they're going to lose, right? They don't know the high school guys
Exactly.
that are going to sign.
Sure.
They don't know the college junior that might come back for a senior year like I did, right? They don't know like how many roster spots they're going to have or how they can allocate their rev share or some of their NIL component. And so I think that's where I think pushing the draft up would just really help everybody all around. So if if you've got the draft, third week of June and the portal still closes, July 1 or first week of July, at least teams have some clarity there on what they're going to have and what they're going to return.
Yeah, sure.
Great
Yeah.
point. Great point.
Yeah.
Great. Hey, can I rapid fire you like a couple players real quick? Riley Quick, where are you expecting to go when all's said and done?
I think Riley probably goes in the comp round. I think he's got that football makeup and he's got a chance to be a big bulldog and a great sign for somebody.
Yeah. Right. And by comp round, you mean like the picks after the first 30?
Still be the first round. Still be
yeah.
considered the first round.
Gotcha. Yeah. Richie Bonamalo.
I think Bonamalo, I think somebody's going to absolutely love the defense. I think he performed really well on both sides of the ball. I'd probably say fourth round, something right around there.
Okay.
I think he's put himself in a good spot.
Right. And I mean, we think we saw what Tyler Fade did in the starting role toward the end of the year. And we think, probably thought that caught scouts' eyes. What do you think that did for him?
Yeah, I think that I haven't looked too deep into his pitch metrics. I think that he's got a great body. He's got a fresh arm.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he established himself as a starter. I think most teams would throw him out as a starter. So I would say that, somewhere in that probably fourth, fifth round would where he gets slotted. Yeah.
Right. And Zane Adams is the last one who's a draft eligible sophomore who we think might come back, but somebody might.
Zane's a guy that could sign for sure if he wanted to. I think somebody would pay him, probably in that, third, fourth round. But I think he would, he's a guy that being a draft eligible sophomore actually has a little bit of leverage.
Has leverage. Right.
He's a guy that I think he adds, 15 pounds and I think he could really come back and improve his stock. I think that you've seen some pitchers come back. You saw, Brandon Sproat do it at University of Florida.
Sure.
And he got a lot better, coming back that next year. And then he really, I think just steamrolled through the farm system and established himself as a top prospect. So, you see that with pitchers more than hitters. And so, Nolan McLean's another one that did it at Oklahoma State. So I think, Zane will be, in a good spot either way.
Yeah. Great. Well, Kent, you were very generous with your time tonight.
Thank you so much.
Busy time of the year for you, and we really appreciate it. This was fantastic conversation. We could go on for 3 hours about this, I'm sure, but we'll let you get back to the family and your clients probably ringing your phone off the hook. Thank you for being with us.
Of course, absolutely enjoyed it. See you guys.
See you, Ken.
Thanks again, and folks, we will be back with another edition of the Weekly Joke soon. Probably another extra after the draft, and maybe to discuss the portal happenings and roster formation for the upcoming season as all that crystallizes over the next few weeks. So thanks again for being with us, Roger. As always, appreciate
Good stuff.
it.
Yes.
All right,
Great
and we will see you all again soon. Thank you.
All right.
Swing it, boys, swing for the fence. Shove it, boys, make 'em miss. Some big league chew and a baseball souvenir. Come on, sing with me now. The Joe is home, sweet home. It's roll, tide, roll. The Joe is home, that's right. Home, sweet home. Hey, look, is that Roll Tide Willie over there? Well, it's Bama Blitz.